So I want to address this not only from the point of view of the history of the Peloponnesian War, but some lessons for our own times. And some of you in the comments last week did make mention of some lessons that could be drawn, not that there are complete parallels that you can draw from one war to another or one time to another, but there are some parallels and some lessons that we can learn from even ancient history. And one of them is that there is plenty of blame to go around. So the question of who started a war is really the wrong question. Many things have to happen before a war happens. Years and years, if not decades or even centuries of problems in mismanaged foreign affairs have to happen in some cases in order for a war to occur. And so in the case of the Peloponnesian War, yes, we had Sparta declaring war, but we had a context in which after the Persian Wars, Athens continued to grow and grow and grow in power and imperial ambition. And Sparta did not really stop them for a variety of reasons, but one of them is that it was held back by its own system of slavery and could only seem to extend itself so far. And also its nature just seemed to be more reticent and conservative than Athens. But Athens choosing to continue to push forward and to take every advantage of their situation is partly to blame for the cause of the Peloponnesian War. And so Athens and Sparta both set a context and didn't think enough about the future consequences of their actions. And they certainly didn't, and no power ever seems to do, take into account the suffering, the bloodshed, the mayhem, and the peril that their actions cause and their decisions cause as they move into these situations of warfare. Every single participant in this war would claim that they were compelled to do what they did every step of the way, that it made total sense for them to make the decisions that they did. And yet, Thucydides' history emphasizes these points of decision along the way, from his archaeology to the conference in Sparta where people are discussing these things. There is this element of choice, all these choices that led up in this case to a tragic result ultimately. And a lot of the context that was created for the war was due to Athenian hubris. Hubris means overweening pride or something close to that, okay? The idea of greatness that is so strong that it seemed to compel Athens to do things that really weren't ultimately even in its own best interests. And we'll see in the speeches by Pericles early on, this hubris or this overweening pride and overreach, okay? Now, yes, it's clear, Thucydides wants to emphasize there is a difference between speeches and deeds. And one of his missions is to see how closely or how far apart are the speeches of these different actors and their deeds. But these speeches and deeds do influence each other in how the speeches, for instance, motivate people to accept or not accept a situation or a decision. In this case, to move forward and not to make a compromise with Sparta. We have two speeches by Pericles at the beginning, a sort of exhortation to war, where he's urging the Athenians to stand firm and to move forward in opposition to Sparta. And then his early funeral oration, where he gives a sort of eulogy, but it's a strange eulogy, to the first fallen soldiers on the Athenian side. All right, so briefly, Pericles, near the beginning of the war, does exhort the Athenians to stand firm and to follow his advice. And he's going to advise that that basically most of them stay within the city walls or retreat within the city walls, which meant for some of them abandoning their country property and moving into the city. And I have to say this now because it really is relevant. That creates a plague. So the fact that, his strategy involves most people retreating behind the city walls and then sending their navy out to attack the Spartans creates conditions that are ripe for plague, and plague occurs in Athens and eventually gets Pericles himself. But before it does, it kills a lot of people, makes a lot of people suffer. So he gives his strategy, but along the way, he tells the Athenians why they should stand firm and why they should be confident that they can oppose and ultimately defeat Sparta. Athens' imperial system, he says, is superior to Sparta's because Sparta's was more democratic and had all cities giving a say. All of the allies could weigh in on decisions, whereas Athens is this more dictatorial, strong, firm, aggressive imperial power. And basically the implication is that's what it takes to win. So if Athens had that, he said, we are so great and so accomplished and so capable that Athens should be more afraid of its own mistakes than the enemy's plans. In other words, the only thing that could possibly keep Athens from winning is Athens itself. We need to just sort of disregard Sparta. And this was a general attitude through a lot of the war, was we really kind of can disregard people. We can underestimate. In fact, it was underestimation of enemies that ultimately led to Athens' demise. And we'll see that later on, but it wasn't just Sparta who was an enemy. It was also the ancient Syracusans who became a part of this larger conflagration. And the Athenians were so confident about their capabilities that they just went plunging ahead. And this is what caused their defeat. He says to guard against fear, because that might make Athens compromise with Sparta and make a deal. Now, in hindsight, it would have been a very good idea for Athens to make a deal with Sparta, but at this point in time, there was no thought to be given of it, and he was cautioning that a good patriotic Athenian should never consider compromising with Sparta, which, by the way, remember, was an ally of Athens not that long ago in opposition to Persia. Okay, now I want to get to the most intriguing and disturbing element of today's topic, which is Pericles' funeral oration. Okay, now, right off the bat, I can tell you it's a fairly, okay, in minutes, it's kind of short, but as far as like the book itself, it's a fairly long speech, okay? And most of it is about Athens, and very little is about the few fallen soldiers who have already sacrificed their lives for the sake of Athens' glory, okay? So it's almost chilling the extent to which Pericles does not say very much about these guys, and he never says anything about them as individuals. He never names them. He never talks about them specifically as, individual human beings. And the vast majority of the speech is about how Athens is glorious and superior. It's a praise and a panegyric to Athens. He says Athens has this great desire for fame and for glory, and all of its warriors and all of its citizens through its war powers should seek fame and glory. That should be the aim of a human being, not other, lowly things like safety, family, good living, maybe even philosophy. When it comes right down to it, the only way for the average person, including the non-warrior, the citizen, to achieve any sort of glory and greatness is through the warriors, through the state apparatus that seeks glory. He says that, the citizens can take part in this conflict by becoming lovers of Athens, that Athens, and he goes on and on about the beauty of Athens and all of its greatness, not only its war powers, but its cultural accomplishments. So they should take, he says, an erotic satisfaction in the beauty, culture, and daring exploits of Athens. And he says that directly. In other words, they really should become lovers of Athens, just as Pericles himself is a kind of lover of Athens. Some leaders, politicians, do tend to become more lovers of Athens than their wives or husbands. It's true. And politics or, political greatness becomes this erotic desire that overshadows all other desires. And I dare say Pericles had made that conversion. And so he's asking everybody else to do this. This is the very essence of ideology and of the lure of ideology, to worship the state, to see the state as your own greatness, to be absorbed in the state. Okay. He even says for the old, when they look back on their lives, more or less, honor derived from the state's exploits is really the only comfort left to them. So think about not only your life, but your death, and you mediocre people who otherwise wouldn't have anything much to, congratulate yourself for upon your death, can feel all of the greatness of Athens is your legacy. Okay, so most of the funeral oration is indeed a tale of Athens' rise to greatness. And there's really only one mention of the fallen dead. And I am going to read this. It's not that long, this section of it, obviously, but it's kind of worth it, okay? He says, and if a test of worth be wanted, it is to be found in their closing scene. That is the closing scene of these soldiers, okay? And this is not only in the cases in which it set the final seal upon their merit, but also in those which it gave the first intimation of their having any merit. For there is justice in the claim that steadfastness in his country's battles should be a cloak to cover a man's other imperfections, since the good action has blotted out the bad, and his merit as a citizen more than outweighed his demerits as an individual. But none of these allowed either wealth with its prospect of future enjoyment to unnerve his spirit, or poverty with its hope of a day of freedom and riches to tempt him to shrink from danger. No, holding that vengeance upon their enemies was more to be desired than any personal blessings, and reckoning this to be the most glorious of hazards, they joyfully determined to accept the risk, to make sure of their vengeance, and to let their wishes wait. And while committing to hope the uncertainty of final success in the business before them, they thought fit to act boldly and trust in themselves. Thus, choosing to die resisting rather than to live submitting, they fled only from dishonor, but met danger face to face. And after one brief moment, while at the summit of their fortune, escaped not from their fear, but from their glory. So died these men as became Athenians. You, their survivors, now he's talking to their parents and family, must determine to have as unaltering a resolution in the field, though you may pray that it may have a happier issue, and not contented with ideas derived only from words of the advantages which are bound up with the defense of your country, though these would furnish a valuable text to a speaker, even before an audience so alive to them as the present. You must yourselves realize the power of Athens and feed your eyes upon her from day to day, till love of her fills your hearts. And then, when all her greatness shall break upon you, you must reflect that it was by courage, sense of duty, and a keen feeling of honor and action that men were enabled to win all this, and that no personal failure in an enterprise could make them consent to deprive their country of their valor, but they laid it at her feet as the most glorious contribution that they could offer. And he goes on a little bit further and basically says, among other things, that these parents should try to bear more children to the glory of Athens and to this glorious fate, that they should not grieve too long but should try to raise up more children to do the same, if necessary, in sacrifice to the Athenian altar. Okay, so imagine yourself a parent hearing these words, that Athens is indeed worthy of your child's death, and that you should raise up more to do the same. But notice before, too, I wanted to point out, about the soldiers. He's talking in a way that will speak to others who are now in battle or are going into battle. And he's basically saying, yes, they were just sort of ordinary, mediocre guys with probably a lot of imperfections. But battles are a cloak to cover man's other imperfections, he says, since the good action has blotted out the bad, and his merit as a citizen has more than outweighed his demerits as an individual. This is a chief reason why people immolate themselves in honor of and in the name of the state. And so I think there's a lot to contemplate there. Pericles understands that these types of motivations come to the fore because of people's feelings of personal inadequacy, that they do not have a means of seeing their own significance in the world and feel small and insignificant and indeed bad. And along comes the state and the ideology and the nation to kind of promise that greatness and that sense of worthiness, right? Okay, so next time we'll discuss the plague of Athens, which comes along right after Pericles' funeral oration and can be read as a kind of answer to it, that the best plans can be disrupted by nature and nature's God, or gods in the case of the ancient Greeks.